Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another SORSE event. So myself and Claire are your chairs for today. And I will say good morning, although I know for some people it is afternoon already. Today we have got a really good workshop. It's being run by a large number of people, so I'll let everybody introduce themselves because I know some people are going to be in today's session and some people will only be in on Thursday's iteration of this workshop. But I will ask everybody to please follow the code of conduct. It's available on our website if you need to reread it. It essentially boils down to everybody, please be nice to one another. SORSE, it's a series of online research software events, and we do have a number of other upcoming events. So on Thursday, we are doing this workshop again at a later time, kind of catching more people in the Western Hemisphere. We've also, in the next couple of weeks, I put up some of the events here. So next week we have a software demo about installing software. We've got another software demo on December the 4th, and then on the 7th we've got a couple of talks. So please do come along to those if you can. We are already scheduling more events for January. And if at any point you'd like to do an event, to run something, whether it be a workshop, a discussion session, a talk or software demo, or even perhaps do a poster during our January poster session, do please submit something. So the link is up at the top there to come submit something. And if you just go to our website, source.github.io, you'll find all the details you need. Carrying on with today, we are recording this event. We have already started recording. So we won't be recording anything in the breakout rooms that are occurring later on, but anything in this room is being recorded. So I'd ask you, if you do not wish to appear in the recording, please keep your video off and your microphone muted. I know there's some Q&A happening, but please do use the Zoom chat function if you want to, because that will not be recorded. But hopefully that's not going to be a problem for anybody. If it is, message me in the chat, myself or Claire. And I will stop talking there, and I will hand over to Michelle.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you very much for SORSE for having organised this fantastic series of events. It's great to have so many different things that we can continue to attend for some months to come. It's very stimulating for the community and much appreciated to have someone do all that coordinating work and enabling our community to come together on a whole range of interesting topics. Let me just share my screen so that I can share my slides. I'm Michelle Barker, and I'm the Director of the Research Software Alliance and one of the facilitators of this workshop today. There's a host of other facilitators, most of whom will be speaking today. Some of them will also be facilitating at the repeat of this event in a slightly different time in a couple of days. So as each of us is involved in some of the presentation, we can introduce ourselves. There's some collaborative notes there that you can utilise throughout the session. We won't be utilising them much for the first hour or so, but they're there for you to have a look at. Those notes include a copy of these slides, and they also include a copy of this agenda. For the next hour or 55 minutes, I'll talk briefly about the goals of the workshop and some of the background around FAIR and research software and how we ended up where we are. And then we'll have a session looking in much more detail about what the FAIR principles are and how they apply to FAIR software to help us all learn a bit more about that. Then there's a break. They will come back with some updates, particularly on the FAIR4RS Software Working Group that most of the facilitators for this session are heavily involved with. Then there'll be another break, and then some breakout groups for the last hour to answer some specific questions. So lots of opportunities to meet everyone else on the call and to ask your questions and to give your input on some of the issues that we're grappling with. As with normal Zoom protocols, if you have a question at any time, you can type it into the chat, or if we're having a discussion session, you can put your hand up in the participants list to indicate that you'd like to input to the conversation. In terms of what we hope to achieve in the next 3 hours, we have a number of goals. We want to engage the community in building the skills that are needed to develop principles and standards, which is really the core work of the FAIR4RS Software Working Group, to develop some principles and standards as relevant to this particular topic. Another aim is to help understand the fundamental properties and uses of research software to increase everyone's knowledge of how to apply FAIR to research software, and particularly to hear about some of the edge cases where it's quite challenging to think about how we apply those principles. Our third aim is to enable you all to engage with each other and with us, so that as a community we continue to have opportunities to learn from each other and share knowledge. And finally, to think a little about how RSEs could play a critical role going forward as this work continues throughout 2021, to champion this work, to provide input in it, to enable consultations with other members of your community. A little background first. Many of you would probably know that in 2016, the FAIR guiding principles were published. And since then, they've been applied extensively to research data, although they were meant to apply, or can, in theory, apply to all digital objects, not only research data. It just so happens that a lot of the focus to date has been on applying them to research data. However, attention has been turning more since at least 2018 to thinking about how they apply to other objects, including software, source code, and workflows. And there's some other papers mentioned there from 2019 that reinforce the need for this. So it's on this background that we've been building to think about how we can coordinate international efforts in this area. It's worthwhile noting that applying FAIR for research software is slightly different to talking about open source software or open research software. There's a little bit of clarity there, that certainly there's a lot of overlap between talking about FAIR research software and open, and then advancing FAIR certainly helps advance the open movement, but they're not exactly the same. And we'll probably explore some of that a little bit more in our later sessions. In terms of work done specifically to look at how FAIR can be applied for research software, a number of groups started thinking about this over the last couple of years, and there's been a number of papers and workshops run, particularly in 2019 around this, again as background to the work today, work that we're building on. One of the papers, one of the most notable papers, was published in 2019 called Towards FAIR Principles for Research Software. And if after today you want a lot of more background information on how the FAIR principles can be applied, that's certainly one worth reading. 2020, we've also seen more work on this, and particularly making recommendations about how this process of applying FAIR for research software should continue. This is an overview of some of the other work that's been done, and was one of the drivers for our work. Was one of the drivers for our working group coming together in March this year at a Research Data Alliance event, noting that there had been a number of efforts across different countries and different disciplines and looking at different aspects of FAIR for software. It seemed like it could be a good idea to think about how to coordinate them to ensure that principles are developed that are agreed by all of the international community and so can be uniformly applied. And to that end, the FAIR for Research Software Working Group formed, and you can certainly join the group. So we'll be talking more about that group in hour 2 and the work it's doing. But now for the remainder of this hour, we're going to focus on what is FAIR and how does it apply to research software. So I'll now hand over to Anna-Lena Lamprecht.
Yes, thanks. I'm gonna find the right window here. Hope that works.
It works.
Right, grand. So we're going instead of like doing the introduction to FAIR software in a bit more detail as a lecture style way, we thought we'd do it in a bit more interactive way and involve you and activate your thinking along the lines, also to get you into yeah, the topic that we're discussing here, and especially those that are a bit open questions and that we're going to take up later in the workshop today. So we're using Mentimeter, and the first couple of questions are just to get everyone set up and warmed up in a bit of an ice-breaking kind of style. So it just works the way that you go to menti.com, either in a free browser window or using your mobile phone, and enter that code. And then you should see a screen where you can answer those questions. And the first question is just, we're just curious of where you are joining us from today. France, I would suppose it's more or less like Eastern, Western Hemisphere. You can also put a place name, that's fine. But country is a good indication already. Greece. Netherlands is strong, Australia. So yeah, not so many Easterners. Brisbane. Very nice. Okay, that was like easy starting question. There's like 2 more of these ice-breaking kind of style. Second question we would be interested to hear is like in your email signature, what is the position or job title that you have there? Okay, some really research software engineers here, postdoc, open science research officer, assistant professor, research assistant, metadata specialist. Yeah, I mean, it's already nice to see it's a good mix. Like, yeah, not only people who identify as pure or are identified in their job title as pure RSEs, but different things. Cool, thanks. And third questions in this series is, why did you choose to join this workshop today? So why are you here? Someone caring about policy that leads to better research. That's a good one. Responsibility. International sessions. Just interested in the topic. Yeah, FAIR for software. Projects related to FAIR. Yeah. Cool, thank you. I think we can like give input for all of these motivations during the workshop. Okay, let's try to get into the thinking of FAIR a bit. So my first question would be, so are you familiar with the FAIR principles already? And especially usually we mean with the FAIR data principles, because that is what is really famous and popular nowadays. Even funders start to talk about that, at least in the Netherlands and Germany. I've seen that at the European level as well. And so, yeah, many people answer yes here. That's very encouraging, I would say. So no one says no, one person somewhat, and like 8 people now and counting for you are familiar with that. That's grand. So I have included a slide here to briefly recap what the FAIR data principles are and what they say, but probably then you all know. So F, A, I, and R just stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But okay, let's do like a short kind of quiz to say how well you can really map statements to these individual FAIR principles. So there's this statement and one requirement in the FAIR guiding principles for data that says metadata are assigned a globally unique and persistent identifier. And the question is, which FAIR principle is that? There's very much agreement on that it is the findable principle. No other opinions? Okay, but this one was easy and that's correct, of course, yeah? So the identifier is for really making things, objects and data and metadata findable. Okay, let's look at a few others. That the metadata and data meet domain relevant community standards. Which principle would that be? Any more suggestions? Guesses? That's interesting because that principle actually belongs to reusable in the FAIR list. I mean, I agree that it definitely has to do with interoperability, but if you look at the definition of the FAIR principles, this is a principle for reusability. And that, and the main reason for that is that it emphasizes the domain relevant community standards so much. So for making things reusable by the community, it needs to meet that standards. Okay, next question. Data retrievable by their identifier using a standardized communication protocol. Which one is that? Yeah, people take a bit more time to think about this. But this is easier again. So this is indeed accessible. It's really retrievable means accessing the object behind an identifier. And that should happen through a communications protocol. Someone is saying reusable. Of course, it has to do with that, but it's listed as an accessibility principle. Okay, last question in this series would be, metadata include references to other metadata, and which FAIR principle would that be? Yeah, so there seems to be much agreement on interoperable, which is indeed true. Maybe you've just like figured it's the only one that was not asked before, so you chose that. But indeed, like the references to other data and the interlinking between data sets and kinds of objects, that's indeed an interoperability principle. But one person is also saying here reusable, and again, I mean, they always are interconnected. This is where it's a bit mean to ask which letter applies this to, but if you look at the list how it's defined, then we would have these four. I'm just seeing like the chat popping up. Are there comments about this? Quick check. Okay, so Matthias is really happy to get those right. That's that's good. And Stefan is getting the brain started. That's good. Okay, so there's going to be a few more questions and asking for your opinions and thoughts in a while. Just next slides here are a bit also, again, to connect to what Michelle has said earlier. So the FAIR principles and this whole discussions is not really old. I mean, this phrase or this acronym was coined only in 2016 and really kicked in very quickly and was adopted by a lot of organizations in the coming years. And the famous paper, I don't know how many thousand citations they have meanwhile, is this big one, the FAIR Guiding Principles for Scientific Data Management and Stewardship. And as Michelle was saying, this was very much perceived for and promoted for data. And this is what everyone knows. And then now slowly people start realizing it also should apply to other kinds of research objects. But that was always the intention, interestingly, and that's in the original paper. And a big other influential paper or document maybe is the 2018 report by the European Commission, where they mention that central to the realization of FAIR are FAIR digital objects, and that may represent data, software, workflows, other research resources. And that they again refer to the original paper, which actually says that it does not only apply to data, although they have it very explicitly in the title. But now, like, the big question is, so how do the FAIR principle actually relate to software in detail? And what you notice, or what we noticed in the discussion like 2 years ago, is that there's really a bit of a mismatch between the broad intention of the what we call the 4 foundational FAIR principles, so the F, A, I, and R, and the way that these 15 more fine granular FAIR guiding principles for data were communicated and perceived. Because these 15, where these are like worked out a bit, are very much tailored to data. And that was a bit the starting point of this discussion. And to get you thinking about what are we talking here today, here's a couple of more questions to you. Maybe they seem easy, but if we usually get lots of interesting answers to these questions. The first question is just, what is data? Just waiting for a few things to come in here. Yeah, so we have a few people here saying, okay, it's kind of information, pieces of information, observation, facts, information in digital form, information that is unprocessed. Yeah, and a resource to be acted on. I mean, this is maybe, again, a bit of a software perspective. Do something with it. Representation of an observation goes a bit more also the technical. Yeah, it's not just the observation, but also the way you observe it. Data is a digital object. Yeah. Information. Okay. Yeah, I mean, nothing about this is wrong, of course. It's just, I would say, different perspectives on how you would define data. And maybe that's also coming from which kind of applications you're looking at the definition. And this one is also nice. So the reason why we program databases and search engines. And maybe that's especially because we have so much data. We need it. Okay, so the complementary questions to this one, maybe you have expected, is what is software? So first answer in uses data to define software, saying that software is a tool that helps processing data. Yeah, so data processing are some definitions. Then we also see executable code, sets of instructions that can be processed by a computer system. Instructions to a computer in a way. That comes here again. And that's also an interesting aspect, like a creative work that processes information and data, yeah. And a series of rules is also very general. Instructions to a computer, a set of algorithms, yeah. Okay, then, so these were software and data in isolation, more or less, although some of you started already to refer to software and data back to define what data and software is. Next question is now really on how they go together or their relationship. If I can get the next slides. So what do data and software have in common? You don't think about the difference for a moment. How could you, in what regards would they be, yeah, the same or similar? Bits and bytes, yeah. Usually digital, that's definitely an important point. Yeah, you represent them. And nowadays, when we talk about data, we usually think about digital data. I mean, software did not really exist before the digital age, in a sense, but data did. Yeah, both exist in digital forms, both can be processed by software. Yeah, that's also interesting. So software not only processing data, but also software processing software. And both are crucial for research. I like that one too, because it's definitely true. And there's so much focus on data at the moment in the scientific and research communities that we should maybe say, okay, we need to make people aware that without software, people could not do much with their data nowadays. Okay, so this about commonalities, like that. What about differences? Yeah, and that leads us a bit already into the direction. So why do we actually discuss FAIR principles separately for software than from data? Yeah. So first important point is software is executable. Yes, and that is one, if not the important difference between data and software. Yeah. Second class citizen in research, that definitely relates, yeah. Although this is a bit of more a meta difference, not so technical, but it's certainly true. Software is a subset of data that can do something. That's an interesting one. We're going to come back to that in a while. Software changes more than data, has more dependencies. Yeah, that's also an important one, and also has more components. Software, the context of the data. Yeah, read it somewhere. Yeah, it's also an interesting perspective for sure. So, software is usually a process. Yeah, data usually not. Yeah, I mean, and then I also like this comment, like, but exceptions exist for data, and certainly there's like more hybrid forms of code and data. I mean, sometimes also if you look at how people use notebooks to directly represent data and do something with it and document the data and include the metadata in there. So there's definitely also hybrid forms, and not only the pure data and software forms. Yeah, so before we talk more about data and software and differences, one more question, maybe to clarify terms for you a bit. If you look at the terms software and code, like what would we say, what is the relationship between those? Because they are sometimes, yeah, definitely in the research community also used in a mixed way. Like, are you sharing software? Are you sharing code? Or is it the same or is it not? What are your thoughts on that? And again, as with the other ones, there's not like the one right definition or one right answer. It always depends a bit on perspective. Yeah, very interesting. We get a lot of different answers here. So I would say like software is based on code. I think that is a very common interpretation of this question. Some would say also code is part of software. There would be a bit of different style, right? Software is a higher level concept. Code is more specific. I think I like that perspective also a lot. Software is code, whether it's binary or source code. The source code code is human readable, is a representation of the software. So the software would be more the product in action by that definition. And so I was saying here, okay, so software is code. Code and software. And here's also code encompasses everything like software scripts and so on and so forth. What else do we have here? Someone's remarking they're often used as synonyms. That's for sure. Yeah, and I don't want to. I don't know if I can zoom out. Actually, I can just scroll. I think they are often used as synonyms for sure. But we can share. So Stefan's question was like, if I could zoom out to see all question. I think I cannot. I can just scroll, but we can share the slides later with a PDF with all answers. We would have them. Okay, so I wanted to come back to that point, like whether software is data or is not data, because that's was a very fundamental discussion, especially at the beginning of the discussion of FAIR and software. And something that you would often hear is the term, yeah, software is just a special kind of data. I think that is a very classical computer science view of things, so that you would say, okay, data is actually everything in a computer and digital system that we can represent by sequences of ones and zeros, and everything that we make from that is just a special kind of data. So information is data, instructions in a computer system and the software are data, and whatever you make from there. And that is certainly from a technical perspective correct, but it does not help very much in the very abstract view and the very abstract perspective that we take in the discussion around FAIR. And there we found something more helpful. You say, okay, no, from this more abstract applied perspective that we're taking, our main parent term in the discussion is actually that of a digital object. And then data is a kind of digital object and software is a digital object. Workflows would be digital objects. Maybe workflows are also software, that's another discussion, but we can also have papers, training material, whatever research objects you can think of. And then suddenly, so it's not, then software is not a special kind of data anymore, but something that is next to data, that exists next to data as another kind of digital object. And it means that FAIR principles that apply to data and software, that apply to data because it's a digital object. For example, like I can assign a DOI, that's a property that is very digital object specific, but not data specific. I can also immediately apply that to software. But there are also things that apply to data and are different for software because, for example, executability, then we would need different FAIR principles to account for these properties. And so this is more the perspective on the relationship of data and software that we take in the discussion around FAIR, because the classical one is just much too technical, and we are on a much more abstract level, here. So usually when we talk here about FAIR software, we talk about research software, and yeah, it's a bit of a challenge because I think we have not yet arrived at a community agree definition of what exactly research software is. I think someone is going to talk about that a bit later in this workshop. So for the moment, we just say, okay, this is research software broadly on which research results depend. And for this part of the introduction, it's only important to note that it obviously comes in many forms for many different purposes on many different distribution channels. And this is also why it's so difficult to find one simple definition of what research software is. Well, one observation that we can certainly make is that traditionally research software is often created as free and open source software. Not always, but there is a strong tendency, definitely in the scientific domain community, to make software free and open. And as also Michelle was highlighting already in her introduction, like FAIR does not necessarily mean open. And if you look at FAIR and FOSS, you can certainly, there's a clear overlap of objectives, but if you look at what they really say, you quickly notice they're not the same. So FOSS is basically about making source code open and using open licenses. And if you look at FAIR, so the original FAIR principles, they do not make data a requirement, open data a requirement. And certainly, I mean, if you know the people who proposed them, you believe them, they love open data, they would want this, but it's not a requirement for FAIR data. And that is due to good reasons, because of course, if you, for example, patient data comes with really privacy sensitivity concerns, and there's a lot of reasons for not making data open in all cases. But these concerns are not in the same way valid for research software, you could say, because I mean, it doesn't have sensitive data in them. You could do something with sensitive data, but that is not what you share. And even stronger, you could say, in the spirit of open science, there's even like a demand to make methods available as part of your paper, as part of the experimental protocol. So why should that not be open? It's just about the process. But this discussion whether FAIR for software, when we're redefining the principles anyway, whether they should require also to be free and open source software, that's a bit of an ongoing discussion. And I'm not aiming to solve that point here, but I would really like to hear your opinion about that. Yeah? So should FAIR for software then require software to have an open license? And not only yes or no, but also could you give a reason why or why not? So are there arguments against doing that? I think there are many good arguments for, yes, but maybe why not? So we have 2 yeses referring to reproducibility. Deal with that. Yeah, so someone saying preferably OSI license, but there might be valid arguments to exclude commercial use. Yeah, someone's also saying, okay, there needs to be a license, but it doesn't matter whether that is open or not. Another argument is here, okay, software does not need to be open to be fair. That is certainly the case if you just translate the original principles. Yeah. So someone says yes, because reuse in software engineering also means reusing the code, not just using like the tool or a binary of the tool. Yeah. But for transparency, reproducibility, yes. So open source license, yes, but one that gives full credit to the original developers. I mean, that's an interesting point because it's a really important discussion in the research software engineering community. Because there's a lot of like research software developers who never really get good credit for their work, although they contribute equally or sometimes even more to research results than the people who end up on the papers. Yeah, not necessarily open, but it should be possible to access the software. Yeah, even if you have to pay for a license. Yeah, I think that is like how the FAIR principle for accessibility would be translated indeed. So it doesn't need to be open, but some access way needs to be clearly defined. Yeah, not if sensitive data is part of the software. I mean, that's true. If there are data concerns with really attached data to the software, then that needs to be taken account. And someone says also, yes, open license with credit. So that doesn't mean public domain or no one cares, but rather more the CC BY spirit. Okay, I wish you could type in more answers. Did I enable more? Anyway, but you're welcome to join the working groups and to put in more, because this is really like an active element. This has not really been decided, I think. Okay, we move on a bit further for the sake of time. Or maybe this last point that came in here. So no, because it's hard to ensure the use of it is proper, like machine learning medical models. So that points more to the idea, okay, I could share my software, but if people use it and they do not really know how to do that properly, it could do more harm than good. But that's of course like debatable. Yeah. Oh yeah, Carlos is mentioning you can, if you want to type in more answers, I have more to say on this point. I mean, the Mentimeter doesn't allow more, but you can also type them into the chat, of course. Or you can still rescue them from there and integrate them in the discussion. Ooh, thank you. So next point, and that's also a big point of discussion, is the relationship between FAIR and software quality. And that was also a bit difficult for us in the beginning of the discussion, because of course software quality for research software engineers is a major concern, and it has different dimensions. And the big question with that was, can FAIR meet the expectations? Because research software engineers come with a high ideals of what software quality entails and how you should ensure that, and how much of that can you actually find back within FAIR. And what we then found to be a useful distinction to say what kind of quality FAIR can cover and what not is to distinguish between form and function of software. Yeah? So form really as being the one, so the shape in which you distribute the code or the binaries, the software product, and kind of the aspects of how that thing looks can be covered by FAIR. And that is mainly relates to things like code quality that lead to maintainability, that leads to how the documentation is structured, how extensive it is. So other things that you could maybe assess by looking at the code base or looking at the software product, but without really executing it for that. And the second dimension is really the quality of the functionality of the software. That means functional correctness, security, efficiency, concerns. So things that you really need to assess while running the software, that is their behavior, that we found goes beyond what FAIR covers. And interestingly, that is also the same for FAIR data. So FAIR principles for data don't say anything about the quality of the contents, or the quality of the data in there. It's just about the form in which the data is provided to others, how it's documented, but it does not assess at all the quality. So you could have very crappy data from a scientific perspective, from content perspective, that is provided in a completely fair way. So it meets all these demands for ultimately being reusable, although it may be also when reused produce rubbish results. Yeah, that's not the point of FAIR. And this can also be a point of discussion, I think. So what do you think here? Should FAIR, and that could be for data and as well as for software, actually should it take content quality into account? And why or why not again? So would it be a good idea or rather not? Do we need an extension to also talk about content quality, or rather stick to kind of the form? Someone saying that yes would be nice, but it's not easy to do that. That's for sure. But maybe that's so much drive and motivation around FAIR at the moment that we could afford it. Yeah, quality is far too subjective. Someone's saying that's certainly an issue with achieving that. Yes. Certification of FAIR is an idea that comes up here. Probably, yes. FAIR quality, research quality, no, yeah, it should not. So it sends a slide like preference for no here, because being realistic, pragmatic, that it would be really difficult to achieve that. And to be honest, already the measuring the normal FAIR is a different task. And someone saying yes here, code written well, structured and best practice and naming convention is much easier to handle. Yeah. Yeah, but I think like many of the things can be covered on like this statically on the code level, and that will be covered by FAIR already. So maybe we can put it there. No, just have the quality of the form, because the higher level go FAIR is the quality of the curation. Yeah. Indeed. So I also think that FAIR, indeed, the intention is to make things reusable, but it's still the responsibility of the researchers to assess the content quality. As is also pointed here, it's a complex process, also very domain specific. Yeah, an interesting one here, yes, to some extent. So if code is impossible to use because it does not list dependencies, then it's not really reusable. I agree with that. Yeah. So, but then you could ask if maybe like a list of dependencies is maybe also part of the form again, and not of the content. But quality is certainly a difficult and important discussion. Yeah. So Morane is pointing in the chat like quality is about peer review, which isn't included in FAIR for any research object. Yeah, I mean, certainly peer review has an important role for ensuring quality as well. Yeah. And you would, of course, like hope that a reviewer of software or a review of a data sets also looks a bit of into the content of the scientific quality of that, and not just in how it's presented. Okay, let's move on here. So I think this is just to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that we're discussing. We have compiled here, like in this slide, like again, a short reading list. I think these are references that show up at other places again. So some of them were already in Michelle's part. So we have these like one paper where we lined out the original ideas. There's Morane's recent report on assessing the fairness of software. It's also a nice read. We have the RDA FAIR4RS Software Working Group. So this link points you to the website with the mission statement of that working group, or case statement that's called, on a bit more things that we find on a practical side to give people recommendations. 2 years ago we had a global sprint on top 10 fair things, where we also outlined top 10 things you can do to make your software fairer. And in the same spirit, the Dutch eScience Center has compiled a list of 5 recommendations for fair software that is now available at this website, fairsoftware.eu. And I think it's, for the moment, for many practitioners, the most helpful reference to point to if someone, what can I now do to make my software fair or fairer? That's a really nice 5-point list. And what it just says, it's 5 things, and they are not super surprising for practicing RSEs, actually. So the first recommendation is just use a publicly accessible repository with version control. So GitHub, for example, then you're done with that one. The second recommendation here is add a license. And also the recommendations here don't say it does have to be an open source license, but you do need to give a license so that people know what they can do with your code or with your software or not. Third recommendation here is register your code in a community registry. That is just to increase findability, also in a domain-specific way. So Google is very powerful, but Google does not necessarily find everything, every piece of software in a very reliable way. So there's in bioinformatics, there's, for example, like bio.tools, where bioinformaticians just know you could go there. And find very many domain-specific tools, even if you don't know exactly what they're called. Fourth recommendation is there, enable citation of the software. So either by putting a dedicated citation format file within your repository, or clearly stating within your README page or something which papers the users of the software should cite. And fifth recommendation is to use a software quality checklist. And then there's a long list of software quality checklist examples from different communities. For example, I mean, if you submit something to CRAN, our package, they have a specific checklist. If you prepare a paper for publication in the Journal of Open Source Software, they do have a checklist. And sometimes also specific scientific communities provide just checklists to check. And the fairsoftware.eu page has a long collection of recommendations for software for all kinds of purposes. So that's really like a practical entry point. And my last question in this regard, before we go into the break, is to you. So if you look at these 5 recommendations, how many of these do you actually already apply? Which do you do? So assuming you develop any kind of research software, do you use a public repository? Do you give it a license? Have you registered your code? Do you enable citation of the software? And have you ever used a software registries checklist? And the indication is here from never to always. And very many people say here, yes, Of course, I do put my code in a version control repository and give it a license. So this is also in line with my expectations to get very like high grades here that people do it. Community registries are not so widespread yet, but I do see some people doing it here. That's very nice. Enable citation of the software. Also quite some people doing it already, although it's room for improvement. Yeah, and the software quality checklist also don't seem to be known so well. But I think to some extent that depends also on who the developers are. So some people might have their own like quality checklists in their head and follow those, although it's not like an explicit checklist for this. Okay, so thanks for your inputs on that one. As I said, so usually after SORSE, the slides will be collected and we can also share a PDF of these Mentimeter things, including the answers. So you could go back to those if you ever want to. And I think then in the program, it's now time for a short break. So I think in the
yes, we have
what should we do? Yeah, I think we're a bit ahead of schedule, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah. we have 8 minutes before the scheduled break. If you want to ask maybe questions just before we go out on the break, now that you have this subject fresh in mind.
Yes,
and then
yeah.
Let's see if we have something.
A question. Can you pinpoint to these checklists? Is there a link in the slides? Because I didn't saw one.
I think it's if you go to the fairsoftware.eu, then there are links to the checklists. Yeah, Fotis has just put the link in the chat. It should be there. And then there you would find exactly there. So there's a concrete link. And yeah, maybe Carlos could more comment on how complete it is, but in my recollection it's already like a quite extensive list of possible checklists, but possibly there are more if you would look for those. And I think there's even one link to the SSI people who offer you a bit of advice, right? So it's not it's not just a checklist you do, but you kind of fill in a questionnaire and then you get even a response about them that some person compiles.
Yeah, and by definition is not a complete list because any list as soon as you make it is outdated. But it's open for contribution. So if you say, hey, my favorite checklist is not included here, or my favorite license website is not included in these recommendations, then by all means send us an email and we can update the content, because that's also something that needs to be kept updated.
I just looked at the page there, and really just links to the to the main page, so to say, and then you have to find the checklist by yourself. I mean, if I would have the option, then I would like to have a choice of 5 DOIs which pinpoint to a certain version of these checklists. This would be now immediately more helpful than having, let's say, 15 websites where I need to find and search for myself. But that's just a comment, yeah.
Maybe Carlos can take it back to your colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions or comments at this moment?
I wonder, is there a way of searching re3 data, which is a repository search engine, to look for repositories which accept code? I mean, whenever I use re3 data, I get a ton of repositories suggested, but searching for, let's say, this requirement accepts code for domain X would be somehow I'm not able to use this search engine efficiently enough.
Okay, I've never tried that. Does anyone here know more about that specific question? does not seem to be the case, I'm afraid. But well, we could record that some. I mean, could you maybe put it in the shared notes? Because that might be something to follow up upon.
Will do.
Okay, thanks.
We have also a nice discussion on the chat about code review, and it's throwing us back to the quality of the code. Just letting you know to check out the chat and see the discussions there. I see we have 3 minutes. Maybe we should do the break, should we? Are you ready for taking a few minutes off and get something to drink, and see you back here at 9:10, which is maybe 9:10 just on my clock, but in the hour plus 10 minutes. We are leaving this Zoom open, right? And everything here, you can stay and chat here if you don't want a break. Thank you, Anna-Lena, very much for this lovely Mentimeter and presentation. It really got our head going, and I was really interested in all the responses we have. We should share the PDF with the responses.
We will. Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the input. That was indeed interesting.
Great. Let's see you back here in 10 minutes, 12 minutes on my computer. Hi, everyone. We are back at 9:10. I'm going to share the slides and give the floor to Paula, which will be presenting the FAIR4RS Software Working Group. Just a moment. It will take me a moment to do so. Just bear with me. Sorry. Present and share the screen. Up. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, you see yourselves now, so just a moment. I'm rearranging. So yes, sorry about that. And I'm going to give you the microphone. Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Morane. Thanks for everyone who is here. Now, in the second part of this session, what we would like to present to you is the updates of the group that's been working for many months behind all this work, that continues to work for a long scheduled time. Next slide, please. The second part in the agenda is the introduction of the FAIR4RS Software Working Group, and also the updates of the pre-work that we have been doing in 4 subgroups, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. Next slide, please. We would like to start by acknowledging all the members and contributors of the FAIR4RS Software Working Group. We have about 140 members. If you are not a member yet, you are welcome to join this group. The link is there, and someone might help me to copy it in the chat as well. It's been presented many times. The registration is free, and you also decide how much input you want to put into this group. You can only, if you like, you can receive all the updates as well. Also, I'd like to acknowledge all the present and the past steering committee members. We are the leading force for this 140 people working. This group is a all-joined project between the FORCE11, ReSA, the Research Software Alliance, and RDA, the Research Data Alliance. We've been endorsed by RDA recently, September of 2020. And now we are coordinating, and we continue coordinating community activities that will lead to the application of the FAIR principles for research software. Next slide, please. What is our motivation? So I think most of the motivation has been given to you during the first hour. The FAIR principles have been published in 2016. A lot of people are working on them already, but we would like to, as much as we want to understand the FAIR principles as applicable to all the research objects, we consider software not just data. And that's why we need to adapt some of these principles to apply better for research software. In our working group deliverables, we've committed to work on this during a year and a half, and we have clear milestones. So the first milestone is due after 6 months in March 2021, where we would like to have a community agreed document with the principles for research, with the FAIR principles for research software. And now you're going to hear about the updates of the pre-work that we've been doing to complete that work. And the second milestone is preparing a guideline document on how to apply these new FAIR principles for research software. And during the last 6 months of our group, we would like to work on examples of how to adopt these new FAIR principles. Okay. Now we would like to redirect you towards our collaborative notes, because after this we're going to be using it for the breakout room. So if you get the link, someone can also paste in the chat, please. Let's start with the list of participants. If I'm not mistaken, that is page 2 of the document. Yes, we have a few questions. So if you've been a member of the group that I'm referring to, the FAIR for Research Software, you can click yes or no. You can actually subscribe immediately if you want to put a yes there. If you don't know about the subgroup activities, don't mind, you'll hear about them soon. Let's give it 3 minutes for people to complete that exercise. So while you type, I might add that this is part of our community engagement activities. We just had a similar presentation at the Research Data Alliance virtual plenary, which was in a difficult time for most people in the world, and that's why we are trying to repeat this activity in more convenient time zones for other people to join us. During the next part of the session, we are going to have 3 breakout rooms where we would like to hear from your input. This is the value that you can bring to us in collecting all those thoughts and information that you have that we want to make available for the rest of the community. Okay, I have 15 participants in the Zoom, and a few less in the document. Please take the time to write, and I think we can continue with the next slide. Okay, before I hand over to each of the working leads of the subgroups, I want to reiterate for those of you who are not part of the group yet, this is work that's been developed during the months of July towards November and December. We separated the pre-work into 4 subgroups. The first one is a fresh look on the FAIR principles for research software. So we are trying to base on the FAIR principles for data. The second one is talking about FAIR and in other contexts, such as workflows and notebooks and training materials. There's been a lot of work developed in that subgroup. Number 3 is, like it was mentioned before, we still don't have a community agreed definition of what research software is. And so we will like to continue that discussion with you as well and hear from your thoughts and definitions. And number 4 subgroup 4 is how this new research is related to FAIR software. And that's a group that's still ongoing, and there is a survey that will be passed around when we talk about that subgroup. Thanks, Morane. I think hand over to you.
Thank you, Paula. Yes, I'm going to present subgroup 1 because Dan Katz, who is the lead of subgroup 1, is based in the United States, and it's very early or very late there. It's like nighttime. So for the subgroup 1, we have taken the steps to have a fresh look of the FAIR principles for research software, and with some steps to do that. First, we ask the group to read the original FAIR principles paper and to vote on each foundational principles and each guiding principle to see if it applies as written, applies with changes, or doesn't apply at all. After that, we started a collaborative working document to discuss why we voted the way we did. This discussion is summarized in a new draft. I will show a few elements from that on the next slide. And we are working iteratively on this document with virtual meetings. And it's a very interesting discussion to really review the FAIR principles with a fresh look. The document is now almost complete, and it will be part of the first milestone of the working group. About the draft, it explains the differences between data and software. It has an initial translation, metadata expands to metadata and data and becomes metadata and software. It's continued translation and discussion about adding new principles like metadata about software should follow the FAIR data principles. F and A basically are not changed, but we see that there are gaps that appear. We have a full section about gaps. For interoperability, there's updated principles based on focus on interoperability facilitated by the exchange of FAIR metadata or data between software and the FAIR metadata and data. And for the R, there's updated principles based on focus on both use and reuse of software, which have a slightly different meaning. The gaps that are exposed are about multiple aspects in the software metadata, software identifiers, the software complexity, and documentation. We see that documentation is kind of hard to put in the FAIR principles. There's a new statement of FAIR for research software principles at the end of the document, which will lead to the milestone we want to achieve. Some of the next steps we see on this subgroup is to compare and contrast with the towards FAIR for research software article Lamprecht et al. And also see the comparison with the analysis that we find in the FAIR report, where all the FAIR principles are analyzed with relevant resources in the literature, and or combined with other subgroup outputs to have it published in the upcoming milestone. So that's it for my subgroup, Dan's subgroup 1. I'm also part of the participants. I will give the floor to Michelle to describe subgroup 2.
Thanks, Morane. Subgroup 2 has been looking at FAIR work in other contexts. So we wanted to look at where FAIR principles had been applied to things other than data and software. And we found a range of areas: computational, notebooks, training materials, computational workflows. We actually found quite a lot of papers, maybe more than 24, but we weren't able to proceed with that analysis because of resourcing issues. But we're very aware that that's a key issue that still needs to be included as we go forward in our work. And then general papers that looks at other types of digital research objects as a large group, rather than specifying notebooks or workflows, etc. We've drafted a final report on our findings that you can go to by looking at the slides. Then the rest of this slide and this next slide just gives a few examples of the things that we found. So for example, for computational notebooks, we found that traceability and temporality of software and its version is an open challenge. And for research objects, we found some things around PIDs and specialized registries that would be worthwhile considering. So now that we've done this analysis, it's given us some ideas on perhaps how we could broaden the application of the FAIR principles through research software a little more, and ultimately maybe work to a definition of how to apply them to a range of digital objects, not just data and software. So thank you. Now over to the subgroup 3 lead.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to present a subgroup 3, which I lead. We had kind of a separate conversation because we did not look at the FAIR principles, but we did look up on the definitions of research software, because we needed, our aim was to review existing definitions and specify the scope for the working group outputs. Since the output is about principles for research software, we need to know what are we talking about, which research software should be or shouldn't be FAIR. For this work, we had identified some goal measurement, smart goal measurements for specific. It should be a concise community definition for measurable, citable, and easily located, for assignable. So this was the work of subgroup 3. Realistic, we're not sure it was realistic. We're still not clear if it is realistic, since the definition is very different for different disciplines, and we don't know if we can have a concise community definition that is agreed by a large set of the community. Time related, we aimed for October 2020, which we haven't succeeded in doing, but we are hopeful that for December it will be ready. For now, we have collected the quotes, and the thing that's very interesting, we have collected software examples on which we voted if they are research software, if they might be research software, or if they're completely out of scope and are not research software. And so to have you taste a little bit the discussion we had on the subgroup, I propose 3 examples here on the slides. The 3 examples don't have the same size because the slide is small. On the top here, the Excel icon. Well, Excel is used by many researchers, as you might imagine, and capture data. But does the software Excel itself, should it be FAIR? That's one of the questions we did answer. Most of the participants of the subgroup said no. We need to keep in mind that there are some subtleties, because there are macros that you can produce with Excel that might be research software. Then on the other 2 examples, we have the Scala language, which started as a research project at the Lausanne University, and is now a programming language worldwide and used in industry in many, many places. So is type of project of research software is still research software. And the third example that we discussed, or that we can look at, is registered software module from the Seagull collection. It's called 3D Periodic Mesh Generation. Well, it's really hard not to say that it's not research software, because it looks like research software. You have even a citation on this registry. It's in the National Archive. And these three examples are really showing why it's so difficult to define research software. So we came up with a few questions that can help us see if it is research software and if it should be fair. So the question are, will the researcher be expected to cite the software? Who wants the software to be cited? Is there a research result that is dependent on software? And was the software evaluated or reviewed as part of a research process, which is also something that we have going on the chat about the peer review and how it impacts software and its status as research software. So that's it for subgroup 3. I'm going to ask Fotis to present subgroup 4.
Yeah, hi all. So I will be presenting the work done in subgroup 4. This is led by Neil Chu Hong. He's director of the Software Sustainability Institute in the UK. Unfortunately, he was not able to join this call, but he will be leading this particular section on the follow-up webinar on the 19th. So roughly speaking, the aim of the 4th subgroup is to sort of look at the state of the art around FAIR software as it is right now. So going beyond the interpretation of the FAIR principles for software that was mentioned in the first subgroup, basically to review what is actually out there. So this activity includes several different sub-activities. So the first one is to identify papers, reports, workshops, anything as a research outcome and output that is relevant for research, for FAIR and research software that needs to be taken into consideration. These outputs can be connected, are connected in the FAIR4RS Research Software Zotero group. The link is provided there, and it actually contains all relevant literature that has been identified since then that should be taken into consideration for further refining the FAIR principles for our software. And having this in mind, revisit the interpretation of the FAIR principles paper and see whether the state, since it's been published about a year ago, if it has been changed, what has been changed, what needs to be adapted, what is our newfound understanding of these particular principles in the current situation. The follow-up point for that is to see whether these insights can be connected to the definition and application of FAIR principles for research software. So this essentially would go to addressing additional aspects like success stories where FAIR for research software has been applied and actually works okay, and it has an impact. What are the challenges that have been identified since then that can be directly addressed by the FSS group? See whether size or scale of the project, of the research project, and the corresponding software may be a particular connection point, and so forth. So this is sort of what has been in progress. Another aspect is that it's been running a survey to get the feedback on these FAIR principles. And not only that, but also to get an idea through examples of how people understand or interpret, if you like, the FAIR principles software. I'll put the link to the survey on the chat window in a bit. But the idea is to use this as an input to see whether we can identify additional work that can be done to address those points. So the output from this survey and from the overall group is to structure our approaches in this FAIR4 group in order to guide the next set of activities. We have the reading list in Zotero, and there are short reports on the important insights that will be out for review and survey by the community. But basically, is the main concept here is to see and always keep in mind what is the state of the art in this particular point. Next slide, please. So this some early results from the survey show some interesting points. Some of them have been already sort of identified from the Mentimeter survey in the morning. So for example, one key outcome is one key result here is that digital repositories that actually capture different types of research objects and can make software findable is actually one of the more interesting roles, and quite often a need to identify for this software. When we are discussing about findability accessibility, this has been identified as one of the most important foundational principles for research software. But if you go to interoperability, this is still an open question. So there is a redefinition of the interoperability for research software in the interpretation of the FAIR principles, but still this is a debatable point. Same is also for reusability. So there is an aspect of reusability for software, but if you actually look closer to it, there are several different ways that you can define reusability that are quite distinct from one another. And a final point is it's quite often the case where research software and software objects in general are quite complex. You might have a full suite of tools, you might have a very complex project. So in dealing with those things, you need to be able to see how these principles can be considered in those cases. In any case, we would appreciate more input and feedback from you. The survey I see is already on the link, so please feel free to provide your input and your perspective here. And I think with that, this is the close of the subgroups, and we go for questions.
Thank you, Fotis. Yes, now it's time for questions. Oh, sorry, I will stop sharing. That will be easier, and I will look at the chat.
May I ask the question directly via voice as well?
Yeah, sure, of course.
So just to get a really far away view, I mean, software is now how old? I don't know. First computers are were running even before World War II and so on. And I wonder if anybody had these ideas also in the industry or in the, let's say, in not academic field, how to basically write down knowledge about software. I mean, I'm just a little bit puzzled that it took us as mankind this long to really think about the nature of software. I mean, did you find anywhere some clues how to basically come to a good set of metadata for software? I mean, it just puzzles me while attending here.
So I'm going to take a crack on the question. If someone else wants to answer that after me, feel free to unmute yourself and answer. So I do think that if you specifically talk about metadata, there is a concept in the industry that does capture metadata, which is on package managers. When you use the package manager and deploy or release, when you release a software package, you have to have some metadata capture in this package, and this will appear on the package manager's catalog. it is different from each package manager. It depends on the programming language. So you have package manager for JavaScript and package manager for Java, and etc. etc. So you can capture metadata in that form, which will not ensure all the or some of the FAIR principles, because the goal is different when you come with this metadata for package manager. For example, also the credit about the software isn't really the main point of focus. I don't know if it answers your question about industry and things that do happen in industry. For example, we have also a good practice from industry that is writing a README file, which is already started appearing in the, I believe in the 80s, and is not a new concept, but there you can capture some software description. Does this answer your question? I'm not sure.
Partially, yes. I mean, we could go into more detail here, but I mean, for time of no. I mean, for example, if you, let's say, work with persons, then let's say you want to pass one person from a person information about a person from one tool to another. I mean, ideally, you would have an interface which describes there's the person and the person is stated like this, and maybe a link to schema.org. I mean, all these things are still relatively new, yes. And our computers are basically still not understanding these schemas, which would make describing this interoperability way easier. I mean,
I agree that it's very new. Because I'm not sure why it is very new, but it is new, and building the semantic web is not as new as doing that for research software. So maybe someone else has an opinion and wants to. Yes, go ahead, Fotis, please.
Hi. I'll start with the disclaimer that I have no involvement with the industry. So this is sort of my perception of what I understood so far. So take it with a pinch of salt, if you may. I would like to make the connection first with the data, and then move to the software and see if it actually does make sense. So in the same sense that we're talking about FAIR principle for data, and we have from that essentially led to the data management plans, I'm fairly certain that a similar concept existed in the industry way before, and this was a more formal data management structure for academia, mostly because every industry had to organize their data in a way that is going to be reusable, findable within their own industry. In the same sense, again, I assume that every industry has their own software standards and software management plan with versions and metadata and registries, but all of them internal to their own industry. So the difference is that there was no need, and again, I'm making a connection to data, to connect different data points to each other, because every industry was, and to extent it still is, quite protected with their own data. So you don't need to make the connections within these different data points. Same sort of with software. At this point, we are transitioning to a stage where software needs to be more community oriented. So because there is a distinct value of community bringing a positive impact to the software itself, to making it better, more quality, more stable. So for this reason, there is this push for standards in how to ensure that these different software pieces fit to each other. In that sense, the FAIR for software follows up the FAIR for data to provide those policies, those recommendations, to connect, to make different pieces of software findable, to ensure that whoever puts it out actually gets credit for it, it's acknowledged, and to be able to use it from further on. And actually, it's not opposed right now to being commercial. So being fair, as Morane and Anna-Lena said before, being fair does not necessarily imply that it's going to be open as well. So it could be fully commercial software and still being fair in that aspect. So this is so to answer hopefully your question, I'm not sure that this is a new problem. Solutions for that probably did exist within the individual industries, as they did exist within individual groups in academia. But now what we're looking at is how those things can be connected to each other in a more standard way. So this is where the FAIR principles for software come in. Again, that's how I see it.
Thanks, Fotis. I want to take a minute because Paula has suggested a really good idea in the chat. It's the code meta project. We haven't discussed it here, but I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit because I think that's important. Just a moment. If you don't know it yet, it's good to know. So that's the Code Meta project website. You can find the terms of the Code Meta vocabulary here. It's actually a subset of schema.org. So you have all the schema.org metadata properties, and you have a few additional metadata properties at the end, which are the code meta terms. This project is very interesting because there's a crosswalks between the code meta vocabulary and different vocabularies that are also in industry and in research and in the different areas, also from digital preservation perspective. So if you see here, there's a crosswalk for DataCite metadata, for Debian packages metadata. So as I said, the packages is the where you find the industry metadata. And something nice, you can create with the code meta generator that was created by the Software Heritage team. You can create a code meta.json file, which we recommend should be added to a repository. So inside the source code, you add a code meta.json file that you can create here on this code meta generator. At the end, you will have it. I didn't prepare myself to do that, so I'm not going to do it live, but you can go and click on the link and come and play a little bit with this form, which will build this code meta JSON file, and you can add the metadata into your software, any software, which is not depending on the discipline or on the programming language or anything else. It's really well, from any perspective, you can do that. Do we have any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing that. You can go and play if you want. I think from the agenda perspective, we're almost at break time. We have 4 minutes. So this is the time for questions before we go into breakout rooms. So after the break, maybe I will introduce the activity for after the break. We'll have 3 breakout rooms. I think that we can have, how many are we? Yes, we can, 5 per room, 4 or 5 people per room to discuss some of the subject that we have already introduced in the previous presentations. So I'm going to let you go on this break, maybe. Or maybe there's a question, I don't know. I don't see, maybe there's something in the chat. No questions in the chat. So I guess we can come a bit early, maybe from the break. Yeah, okay. So let's take 10 minutes. So it will be for me 3 3 minutes before 10. Oh, let's do 10. It will be easier. Yeah. I'm trying to calculate how much is 10 minutes. Yeah. So you can stay and chat here, or you can go on your break. I'm going to get some coffee. Thank you all for participating for now. We have a minute to go. Before we start, there's a kind of reflection that we have about staying as one group or do the breakouts. When we be at the, we are at the hour, so I will say it again. So hi everybody that are back here from the break. We have kind of a question if we should stay as one group or do the breakouts, because we are 14. Let me start by sharing the slide for the breakout rooms, and we'll see what you think. If you have an opinion, please do that in the chat, and we will see what's the opinion of most of you. So I'm going to share my screen. Well, and present. Do you see my screen? Yes, excellent, good. So, so this is the third part, and on the agenda, as you see, we are at 10 a.m. on my my time. Yes, I'm sorry. It's not very inclusive, but yes, it's 10 here. And the breakout groups, I think we have a slide for that. Yes, we have a slide for that. And we did prepare documents for each breakout room. So let me see if you did vote on doing a full room. Okay, so maybe we should do the breakup. You know what? We are, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sharing my screen and you see my comments. I need someone to like say what something. Should we do or not breakout rooms?
It's Michelle here. Maybe everyone could indicate in the chat if there's a particular topic they're interested in, as Malin has already done. And that will help us see if there's a couple of people interested in every topic, in which case we could do them all as a group. Or if everybody wants to do only one of them, we can have a lengthy session on that. So we have 2 votes for all of them, and one for number 3. Anybody else wants to weigh in? So I'd suggest we stay as a bigger group unless anyone else passionately wants to go in a small group.
Well, I do think that we are, it would be hard to do a roundtable, like we introduce ourselves here and do us, and each subject is a very, well, has many things to cover with each subject. I think that having 1 hour for all 3 subjects would be, I don't know.
It was scheduled for 30 minutes, Morane.
Yes, I know.
It's another 1 hour.
We could ask the 3 facilitators, Fotis, Carlos, and Paula, how they would each like to run it.
So I'll start from my side. I think it makes sense to, given that there is some interest from everyone on all subjects, I would say that we keep this as a big group, with the sort of extra step of streamlining this discussion, and I hopefully not getting for like full 30 minutes per topic, which will be quite impossible. But mostly like 15 minutes, 20. And from my side, I'll try to keep this as close to the actual duration as possible. So that's sort of my take.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're sufficiently small group that we can have a civilized conversation all in one room. So I would be in favor of that.
Okay, I see that Terry has a comment about the technical point of view, which is that this discussion, if we stay all in this room, this discussion will be recorded. If we break out, it won't be recorded. So keep that in mind when you are participating. If someone feels that he needs to be on a separate room to have the discussion but not be recorded, that can be also, we can also do just main room and a separate breakout room. I don't think that causes any problems. Maybe even it will do a separation of two different subjects, or we can cover all the subject in both places. That's also a possibility. Do someone so Stefan says that he can cut the recording of this part off if needed. So please let us know if you don't want to be recorded and you want to stay in the main room. So now that I feel that we did decide to stay in the same room, and I do think that it's a good option because since we are all here, we have more points of view. So it means also less time to speak for each of you and me. But let's start in that way so we won't waste any more time, and see if the conversation is unmanageable, we will break out to breakout rooms. So I'm going to invite Fotis to start because Fotis has the #1 room subject. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and maybe you're going to share your document for this subject.
Yeah, thanks, Morane. I'll do that. So hopefully now you are able to see my screen. I'll sort of zoom this a bit more.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So it doesn't make sense now to fill in lead and participants because we are all in this together. So the main point of this breakout, or technically breakout, was to discuss a bit about the interoperability and what it actually means for software. I've put here a definition that comes in from the IEEE Standard Glossary, which is the ability of two or more systems or components to exchange information and to use the information that has been exchanged, which definition was slightly extended to include semantic interoperability, which also implies that this exchange makes sense, that the request and the provider have a common understanding of the meanings of the request, service, and data. So that being said, and looking from a particular research software perspective, it might not always be this formal of a definition, but we would like to have a more working definition of interoperability. In other words, if I were to ask, and this is my actual question now to everyone, how would you define, or how would you interpret interoperability for software, for your own work? How would you describe this? And I would really aim for a description that is easily communicated to a non-software professional. So someone, for example, coming from the life science domain and is using software but not really developing it, how can you define interoperability in their context? And thank you, Paula. I'll highlight this question, and if you like, feel free to put your name and your comments directly there. I'll give it a minute, and then I'll get directly to discussing this. All right, I see that there are already a few interesting points. I quite like the point here that actually puts different levels of interoperability, which might be an interesting point to investigate. All right. So what I'll do now, I'll try to go through each response and sort of highlight the aspects that I see that are sort of key here to the best of my understanding, at least. Okay, I see Morane's definition from the Wikipedia. I have no idea what part to highlight here, but
I think that you should highlight the interfaces, because that's the part about interoperability in computer science, which I tried to translate afterwards, but I don't find the words to do that on writing. But it's about interfacing between different aspects of the same system and having it interoperate, which is a very different definition than the interoperability in the FAIR principles, in my opinion.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, I'm almost done, I think. So we can go through these definitions, and so I see that there is sort of a common there is one at least common theme here, which is the exchange of information. I see it already in a few points. So in the first definition is connect to another computer, write my own tools to work with the software. So this means that you can connect a software to another one. So interoperability basically covers the point of connecting software to each other. I think this is sort of the interface. A more specific aspect to the same end is read data and output data in common formats. Also suggesting the right software for connection to each other. Same point. Read and process and write metadata and exchange metadata. So this is one level up, as far as I can tell. So it's not necessarily connecting with the formats, but rather with the metadata that is defining the output or input. So the workflow is a more, so this is my interpretation. So workflow is a more life science oriented perspective on how to connect piece of software. So at least it sounds more often in that context. Extended and sensible way. So this is the other one. So the second theme that comes in is the independence so basically independence. So this is the interoperability definition that comes to my mind when I think of Java as a programming language, which is technically, or at least is designed to be OS agnostic. So in that context, the interoperability is defined as, again, with this theme that sort of emerges from the different definitions as a way that you can design your software or provide your software in a way that is completely agnostic to your operating system. So first of all, let me put these 2 points here. So 2 main themes. Seamless exchange information. That was theme 1. And theme 2, independence to OS. So my first question here is, so first of all, thank you a lot with the different definitions. I find them extremely interesting. But I also what I also like is that all of these definitions sort of capture the same aspects of the perception of how what interoperability is roughly the same. The problems come when we try to iron out the details, if you like. So before I get your opinion on whether these are the 2 points that emerge from the definitions, I'd like to ask you for your thoughts. So is what I'm describing here an accurate representation of what you've captured here? Are there some thoughts you'd like to share? Of course, feel free to unmute, or you can directly type in the chat window. I'll keep an eye on there as well. I see a few thumbs up, which is a good indication that things sort of sound okay. Okay. So I would like now to go, before I go to the second question, I only have 2 questions for interoperability, and hopefully that is going to be sufficient for the time that we've allocated to that. So my first question is, do these 2 points actually resonate and capture everything that sort of been said before? If not, could you please let me know what I haven't captured with these 2 main points?
Maybe a thought about the independence to the operating system. I can see a clear benefit of having it OS independent, but having that as a requirement for FAIR software, I think will make it hard for some people or some fields to actually provide FAIR software.
I completely agree, but my question was mostly if I've captured the definitions here. My next point, and actually let me paste the question directly, is based on that, based on the definitions that you've currently went in the process of thinking about, what is the single most important or crucial element of interoperability for software based, again, on this discussion? So I agree and I would encourage you actually to sort of sing it out loud or even typing it down, whatever feels more convenient. I would start by saying that I agree that the independence to the operating system, although it's extremely useful, is one that does not necessarily fall under the core definition of interoperability for the FAIR principles perspective. And again, there is interoperability by itself is a very tough point to define. We've been through that a few times already. And there is this computer science view, a more formal view, if like, of interoperability, which also covers this dependence to OS. But for fairness, I'm not yet convinced that this should be a core requirement or one of the core definitions of interoperability in that context. Yes, Morane.
Can I jump in? I just want to say that the interoperability as defined by the FAIR principle is more lightweighted than the interoperability we can imagine for software. And so the question that you ask and should be asked is if we want to follow, which part we want to follow, and really if we need to enlarge the current definition to something that is more for software, but will eventually cause more requirements to software engineers or research software engineers to do on their software. And I agree with Axel that having it OS independent is kind of a very big ask, which should not be included in the new FAIR principles.
Thank you, Morane. I'm putting this as a note here.
Just a quick question about the time. So we have, we're 21. We want to have 2 more subjects and we have some next steps questions. So I'm going to give you maybe 2-3 minutes to wrap up this interoperability
Thank you.
discussion.
I agree. I was planning for 2 more minutes, according to my clock here. But yeah, I agree. So I see that the points that are being raised, and there was also an interesting point in the chat window about the meaning of the exchange information is missing. So as far as I can tell, the exchange information is coming up as the priority, as the single most element, and should be captured in the definition, in the working definition of interoperability. There are some additional elements that come in here, so I'll also put this the meaning of the information somewhere. Sorry, can I copy that? No, I cannot. I'll tap it down. Thanks, but what I see also as a few points is about the environment, that the interoperability is a key requirement for interoperability is the environment. I'm not 100% sure about that because this feels more like the reuse aspect, but I think this is also going to be a full discussion as well. So I would like to sort of sum this up and have a consensus before we move to the next breakout. So in terms of working definitions, the key aspect is the exchange of information. This connects to standards, and this might be domain relevant and community-based standards. And this is a quite important point for me as well, because it also connects to the metadata aspect of the FAIR principles, ensuring that these are maintained is also a point for the metadata. Having the meaningful exchange information, this semantic aspect, might be interesting to keep in mind. I'm not really sure if it will increase the complexity of the interoperability and the requirements that connect to it based on that. But given the interest of this point, given the +1s that I see, might be something to consider. But I think this is a pretty stable consensus of what interoperability should look like. So I would like to thank you. I'll stop sharing the screen now. And I think I'll pass on the floor to Carlos and the usability part.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So for the usability part, I'm gonna basically follow Fotis' example of breaking it down into two questions that I have. So I'm going to first ask you if you can paste my first question here. Why do we want to reuse software? So what's the use case that we're trying to solve? So if you can do the same, just put your name and put your reasons for why do you want to reuse software. We can go through this a little bit quick. Okay, so just reading from the top, speed and reduce duplication. Yeah, so I guess avoid duplication, reduce duplication, that increases the speed of research. It's also an aspect of quality that Axel highlights. Save resources, also avoid duplication, prevent people from reinventing the wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel, don't reinvent the wheel. Okay, and Morane is also, there's a difference between reusing and reusing. So we can use the same tool for different purposes or the same tool for what it was built initially. Am I understanding that correct, Morane?
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
You understand it correctly, but I really want to make it clear that there's the usage of the software where you are using an executable, or even if you are using the source code, but just compiling it and executing it, and not using it in your own research in the sense of really doing something new with the first piece of research. So the software that you are looking at and reading, and maybe taking the code and recreating something new. So there's these two aspects of reusing, and for the second one, the one that you take the code and re-implement it or take it into your research, that for that you need open source software and not just FAIR software.
Yeah, so that's actually something very interesting and very important here, that there's a different use cases of why are you how are you reusing the software? Are you trying to use it just with different data as it was built initially, or do you want to maybe modify the software slightly to fit your purpose for whatever it's your aim? And then absolutely, then you need access to the source code, and then you need to be able to modify it. So I think there how you're using the software has a very important role to play, and that's why my second question was more about given the objective that you have for reusing software, what stops you from being able to reuse software? So of course, software not being open source is a a very big limitation if you want to reuse it in the open source way. But what are the other obstacles that are usually encountered when you try to reuse software? I'll give you another couple of minutes. So while you're all typing away, I'll start highlighting again some of the issues that we see. So of course, licensing is an important one. Dependencies, documentation. So more complex software, it's more difficult to build on top of, which I suppose, Marcus, that also relates to documentation. Yeah, so Axel also highlights documentation. Licensing. Okay, so Stefan also, actually Stefan Zunliang mentioned something very similar, that finding the right tool is a big problem. So it's not possible to, so if you can't find the tool that you need to do a job, then you will end up building your own library, right? So if you are trying to do X and you cannot find a library that already does X, then you will invent your own wheel. So actually the first problem that we should solve is the findability of software. That's also interesting because yes, of course, documentation and licensing that other people are highlighting, it's very important. But the issue of findability is also quite something that needs to be tackled. Yeah, so I think if I summarize it as findability, licensing, documentation dependencies, those are some of the keywords that I think are probably more important in this second question. I don't know if anybody would like to add anything to this if I want just like 3-4 keywords that are like the take-home messages, and I would say that these are the things that we really need from any reusability criteria that we come up with. So if anybody has any comments that you say, hey, I think you're really missing something super important here, I would like to hear it. And if not, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll pass on the staff to whoever's next.
Paula is next, but I see Terry has raised her hand on the video. Terry.
Sorry, Terry.
I was just going to say one other thing is if you're thinking about reusing software in terms of checking other people's results and reproducing their work, you might not necessarily have the time or funding to be able to do that.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to summarize a little bit of a higher level resources, because that also highlights another problem, that if in order to reproduce somebody else's results, I need to access to a supercomputer and I only have my laptop, that's also a potential issue. So yeah, absolutely right, Terry. I completely agree with you.
Thank you, Carlos. That was an excellent discussion here on the document, I see. And we will get it through to the FAIR4RS software subgroups so we can reintegrate it in our own discussions there. I'm going to ask now Paula to lead the breakout 3. So I will share my screen and Paula, you are next. Just a moment. Can you share the link to the
Thank
document?
you. Yes, I pasted in the chat.
Great. Can you see the screen? Is it the right one? Yes, it is. I see you all joining. Okay, go ahead, Paula.
Yes. Okay, first I'll start with the motivation about this question. We had another group activity with the community discussion that started with, what about we put our minds into, we already have the FAIR principles for research software, and then how do we make them applicable? How do people start using them? And one of the key highlights of that discussion was that we need to motivate it, and giving credit to people who deserve credit was the best motivation for that. So the question here is, how would you want to get credit for making your software fair? We recognize that this is an extra effort for everyone, and so how will it be best for you to accredit that work? We've defined the question with an audience in mind, but if you are not a developer or research software engineer, please think about other kinds of work that you might want to receive credit for. This is really nice to read. People are highlighting important things that we've already considered, for example, citation. There has been work developed around citation specifically for software, and I actually added extra resources at the end of the document if you would like to have a
Paula, are you still here? I feel like we lost you. Maybe it's
my engine is a bit unstable. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Great, great to have you back.
Sorry about that. Not the best internet at this time. I think everyone's watching movies at this time in my house. So I'm sorry, but I can't read the following answers because I'm unable to see them. Morane, can you help me guide the discussion, please?
Yeah, sure, of course. Okay, so yeah. Yes, as you said, there's the citation part. That's a big part of credit. As you may know already, that citation isn't part of the FAIR principle, and that's a good question if it should be more clear about how to cite software in regards of FAIR, or even if it's missing from FAIR. I see here that resources like a factor for grants is kind of it's really the main thing, because when FAIR principles are just principles, maybe that they won't be used by everyone because they are just principles. But when they are impacted by policymakers and people that do give resources to software development, that can be a change factor. What can I see? I see again about citation. We have some ideas about badges. Terry with the GitHub badge. It's a nice idea to have that also on GitHub. And I've written about doing some kind of a FAIR badge, like an ACM badge. Don't know if you know the ACM badges. It's about 3 badges, repeated, or 5 badges actually, about functionality, repeatability, reproducibility. So we can imagine some kind of a FAIR badge. Then I see, it's hard to do that kind of interactive reading. Do someone wants to go and present what's like lively, do that live and say what he had in, or she had in mind when taking that, when writing? I invite you to do that. Okay. Just unmute yourself. We're here. I will continue if you don't want to. There's a nice comment about having the same level as a paper. It's really that important. Yes, we are trying to have research software be higher level than it is now, because recognition isn't given to the development of the software, and researchers need to do articles to get recognition. So there are many articles that are describing software that accompanies the software. So that's a good remark. Everybody here is like talking about recognition. So I see that the last comments, Anna-Lena's about, again, FAIR badge. Yes, exactly. Yes, I really like the idea for a FAIR badge. It's a type of reward and not just punishment if you didn't do a FAIR, so you go to your room. So that's maybe that's the thing that we need to push for as a community, to have that badge created. Do we have some comments in the chat? I don't know. I didn't see. Do we have comments in the chat?
We do have two, and I'll ask you please to copy those links into the document because we might not be able to save this chat for some reason. And we have other resources also in the document at the on the second page, now on the third page.
We have a last minute for this because we want to keep the 15 last minutes of the session on the next steps. So if you have something else to say, to write, this is the time. And in a few seconds, I will stop sharing my screen and we will get to the main, or maybe I keep sharing my screen for the slides, right? Maybe that's the best idea. Since we didn't have breakout rooms, we don't have to do the reporting back because you all know what we have said in the breakout rooms in the discussions, which is very interesting because we can see we have different perspectives also from the for each subject. We have had interoperability, we had reusability, and credit for having fair software. So I'm going to do that, present. I'm not sure who presents, who was supposed to present now. Maybe Michelle? I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading the slides and thinking about it. Yes, the next steps from here is a section just to explain what our working group is doing from here on in. So as we talked about in the second hour, we have some subgroups that are at different stages of development. So for example, subgroup 2 on FAIR and other contexts that I have been leading has finished, but some of the other subgroups are still ongoing, but will be finishing soon.
Sorry, Michelle, I kind of remember that we had this question because we have this question on this slide deck, but we have it also on the Mentimeter. Do we want to all get back to the Mentimeter and answer these community engagement plans questions?
Either's fine, but if Anna-Lena wants to fire up the Mentimeter and share her screen, that would probably be slightly better.
Yeah, we'll do.
In the meantime, I'll just keep talking. So there's numerous ways for you to still be involved, to join the FAIR4RS Software Working Group, as we've said. And as those groups, subgroups each finish, we'll begin seeing how we pull those pieces together to draft some principles. And then a major work for the next 6 months is extensive community consultation. So other pieces of work in the sector, such as the FAIR recommendations on FAIR software, have made it clear, reinforced our beliefs that the drafting of this work needs a lot of input. So over the next 6 months, as we keep redrafting and looking for input, we'd like ideas on events that we should be involved in, either events where we can present directly as a group, as we've done here with SORSE, or groups or events that we could collaborate on. So for example, the Collaborations Workshop 2021, which is at the end of March next year and start of April, has already made FAIR4RS software one of their major themes. So we'll be working with them on that, but a lot of the presentations will be done by other people. Or if individuals or groups would like to run FAIR4RS software sessions at their own events, we're happy to provide slide decks, etc., so that you can do so. So good to see Australian examples there in the RSE conference. I guess we are keen to keep conversations alive with the different RSE associations and the conference, because certainly the RSE community could be a major contributor of input, and we'd like to see how we could use some of the national associations to run community conversations in their communities. So it could also be possible with discipline groups, that some disciplines might want to run their own specific conversations. So I guess eLife Innovation Sprint is an example there of the life science community. So yes, please feel free to add more ideas. And actually in the collaborative notes, if you scroll right down the bottom, this question is also asked there. So if you have any later ideas, you can input them there. Yeah, Netherlands. WAS, yes, we've already had a conversation with WAS, and it's likely FAIR for Research Software will be a major theme at that, and we'll collaborate on achieving that. So that looks good. The next slide, thanks. Yeah, I guess that's a slight variation, that if you have suggestions on organizations that we should be talking to who are doing work around FAIR for software that we haven't already mentioned in the conversation or in the Google documents. We particularly mentioned quite a few of the credit ones, but others like Code Matter. If you are aware of ones in your community that we don't seem to have mentioned, already have networks into, then we'd like to know about them so that we can talk. And it could be a national focus, a discipline focus on some part of FAIR for research software. It could be, for example, looking at preservation or only interoperability or only FAIR curriculums for software developers. So we're very keen to hear about anyone else doing similar work that we can align with. OpenSci, yes, good point. So again, you can keep entering that also into the collaborative notes documents. And the last Menti, thanks. Funders. Yes, so we have had some conversations with Wellcome Trust because they do have this major project starting with the Research on Research Institute, RORI, to design Fairware, a tool that will assess the fairness of grantees' work. And if any of you have seen their call at the moment for developers, for a group to develop that Fairware, it's mostly data focused. They have about 3 requirements around how fair the software is, which are things like, does it have a license? And software preservation network, yes, is one we haven't talked to yet. So yes, thank you for reminding us of those, and some other discipline ones. Sounds good. NFDI, okay. If you go into the collaborative notes, there's also an opportunity to give links of contacts if there's particular people you know who are working on this. And then the last Menti, thanks. And then a final question is, what types of materials will be useful in socializing these ideas and the drafting of the principles so that we can get a lot of input? So we're acutely aware that not all of the research community, even the research software community, know what the FAIR principles are. Even if they may in fact be applying some of those principles, they may not have heard this terminology. And of course, there are cultural blockers still for some people in applying some of the FAIR principles. And so we'll need to do a lot of socializing of the idea, as well as asking for feedback directly on the principles once they're drafted. So interested to hear what else we could produce as a group to help enable that, either us to use in conversations or for others, like your organizations, to use with your communities. So training on FAIR4RS is a good one. So our carpentries, I believe, have a FAIR module. I know there's a number of people on this call who are far more au fait with what the carpentries are up to than I am. Maybe it's a FAIR data module. So yes, an opportunity there. Examples of FAIR software, yes, we've certainly thought about examples as well, so that's good to have that reinforced. Yeah, videos, code refinery lessons, list of repositories. Lots of very good ideas there. An easier way to find a description of the principles. Okay. And a Twitter account. And the Mentimeter from the first session. Thanks. Well, lots of really good ideas there, and we'll certainly be thinking a lot about that over the next few months as once we have the principles, an early draft of the principles, we'd like to go out and use a lot of these ideas to get a lot of input. So that's the end of the Mentimeter. If we could just go back to the main slide deck, We just have a few links of some other events we have coming up, a fancy introduction website. Yes, certainly we need star branding. FAIR4RS, we've already got the hashtag up and going. Maybe we need the logo next as well. Explainer videos, yeah, very good ideas. So just to let you know about another complementary piece we're involved with, the Research Software Alliance is leading. We're aware that having the FAIR for Research software principles is only the very start of the puzzle. So I don't know if anyone's able to find the slide deck again, or maybe
I'm doing that.
Okay. Sure.
Sharing.
If we look at the history of the FAIR principles, they've been applied extensively to data, as we all know. But if we think about, I think it's about 2 or 3, yeah, that one. If we think about FAIR data, there have been many different initiatives looking at how to develop FAIR data repository certification, or FAIR data curriculums, or FAIR data interoperability frameworks, etc. So we're involved in another piece to look at how we can roadmap some of the many different things that are going to be needed once we have the principles. Metrics and maturity models are another good example. So we're trying to identify who's working in different areas, who might like to come together to think about how to apply the FAIR principles once agreed in that area, and to also include funders in that conversation to provide some resourcing. So next slide. So just a few links coming up. The FAIR's FAIR webinar is coming up next week. If you'd like to input on that or learn a bit more about it, as we said, Collaborations Workshop is one of the events now lined up to do a lot on FAIR for Research software. And there's also some road mapping events coming up. For example, at the International FAIR Convergence Symposium, it's the only event that mentions software in its title at that event. And you can also subscribe to the FAIR for Research software roadmap updates if you're interested in that piece of work. And final slide. After 3 hours, fantastic effort, everyone. Thank you so much for your dedication today. We really understand how much 3 hours is, and what a big chunk it can be out of your day. And thank you for staying with us. And we certainly found it very useful. There's lots of good feedback we've got on all of the sessions. And we're repeating this workshop again on the 19th at a slightly different time to get a different audience in. And then we'll be amalgamating all the input we've got into our ongoing work. Thank you to all of the co-facilitators of this and people behind the scenes, and of course to SORSE who have enabled it really to happen. And thank you. Let me just ask if anyone else wants to do any other acknowledgements or final words there.
Well done, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really interesting workshop.
Pat yourselves on the back. Great, thanks everyone. We look forward to seeing you at another event or some other community engagement through SORSE or whatever, and talking to you again. Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone.